Okay, it is story time, you guys. This is fun. This is the first kind of time I've ever actually gotten to read a little picture book to you, and I'm trying it in a different format. So let's see how this goes. I'm trying to record it so that way, if you want to watch it over again, you can. But anyway, I'm going to be reading a story to you called Hana in the Time of Tulips, and we'll get to that in a second. The reason why I selected this book is because this book involves a character that we are getting to know and getting to know pretty well, and his name is Rembrandt. Okay, he's a brief character in this story, but one of the reasons why I think it's important for us um, to talk about this is to understand a little bit about what life was like for Rembrandt as far as what was going on in his world in Holland at that time. Does anybody know what this is? And you're thinking, yeah, it's a cute little dog. Well, that's true, but this is what's called a beanie baby. Your parents probably know what beanie babies are. You could ask them about that. You might even have some beanie babies. They're not all dogs. They're all different. There's all different types, right? And beanie babies at a time were all the rage. I don't know when this was, if this was like in the 90s or if this was like the early 2000s. I'm not really sure. But for a very brief time, beanie babies were like people were losing their minds. Like people were waiting outside stores, waiting in long lines outside stores that sold beanie babies, and they heard the new shipment was coming in, and they would spend their hard-earned money to get these things. Why? Because it was believed that they were worth a lot of money, and some were worth a crazy amount of money. They had to have their tag. I don't have a tag on this one anymore, at least not the little original tag. But they were, certain they were collector's items, and so people were saving these things and collecting them and spending a lot of money, and they were worth a ton of money. These beanie babies, it was just like crazy. Beanie babies were going for hundreds of dollars, each, and I mean, it was strange, but that was the world we lived in because they were being sold online, and because a particular beanie baby was so rare, it was very, very valuable. And that was all fine until all of a sudden the fad ended. I'm not really sure how it ended, but it just ended. And sometimes things are just like that. And when it ended, all of a sudden, all these things, all these beanie babies, all they were worth was maybe a few bucks as much as they were probably worth when we bought them from the store. And so people had a lot less money because of that, and were stuck with a lot of fairly worthless. No, you're not worthless. I'm sorry. Uh, Worthless beanie babies. Now, I say that because a similar thing happened in Holland back in Rembrandt's time. Does anybody know what a tulip bulb is? Okay, a tulip bulb. Well, a tulip bulb looks like this. Not very pretty, is it? But from a tulip bulb, a beautiful tulip grows. Okay, and tulips, I'm sure you've probably seen them. These are some yellow ones, and there's some kind of red ones, and the pink one in the background there. Tulips are very common flowers now, but they weren't very common in Rembrandt's time. In fact, they went for a lot of money. There was one particular flower, one particular tulip called the Semper Augustus. I don't have a picture of the Semper Augustus. Maybe you can look that up sometime, but it's kind of a striped tulip. And it was so rare and it was so valuable. It was worth so much that you could buy a house for the price of a bulb, a Semper Augustus tulip bulb. It was like 5 years' wages for your average like bricklayer. That's how much one Semper Augustus tulip bulb would cost. It was crazy. So people were buying these things up like crazy, just kind of like they did with the Beanie Babies. Um, Famous artists were trading some of their works, trading some of these world famous paintings. Well, they weren't maybe not world famous, but they were famous paintings that ended up becoming world famous paintings, selling for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, all because of these tulip bulbs. So it was an interesting fad that happened, um, and so it was a big market. People were very interested in buying and selling these things, and tulips became almost like a type of currency. Okay, let me get another picture. Here's some other pictures of some tulips, and so. But just like the Beanie Babies, what ended up happening was the market for the tulip bulbs all of a sudden just kind of stopped. And everybody that had a lot of money invested in these tulips in Holland ended up losing a lot of money. It was kind of a catastrophe for the economy over there. And so it's good if you know that going into our story today. Look at that. Look at those tulips. Aren't those amazing? It's good that you know that going into our story today called Hana in the Time of Tulips. Okay, so I'm going to be reading this to you, and as I read it, I'll be showing you the pictures in the book so that you can see it. Okay, so here we go. Early evening, when Hana and Papa walked in the garden, Hana brought the little fan that Dr. Depassier had given her. This was in case Papa fainted dead away on the bench. Most evenings Papa did faint, and when he did, Hannah, the renowned physician, fanned him and felt his forehead. Let me show you the picture here. There you go. And felt his forehead. She put an ear to Papa's chest and listened anxiously to his heart. Soon, but not too soon, he groaned, "What's the cure there, doctor?" Hannah prescribed a kiss or a race to the woodpile or a nose full of roses. So let's make sure you understand what's going on. So for whatever reason, Hannah's father would just kind of like pass out, and so she kind of pretended that he was his doctor, and he would say doctor to his daughter. He said, "What's the cure?" And she was saying, a little kiss or maybe a race to the woodpile or just play with me, right? So there's something bothering her dad, and she's just trying to get him to play with her. Okay, so are you with me on that? All right, let's go back to the story. But in the time of tulips, Papa did not go on walks with Hannah or faint in the garden. Like many merchants in Holland, Papa devoted himself to wanting. He wanted riches, more riches. He would not rest until he had them. And tulips in those days were as precious as gold. Papa's private tulips grew beyond the fence in the north garden. I think you can probably see that back here. In the north garden, Hannah and Franz Dachshund were forbidden to play there. When Hannah was good and patient, Nurse opened the gate to show her the proud beds of red and yellow and white tulips. In the time of tulips, Papa spent his days in the inn trading tulip bulbs in his evenings with Dr. Depassier and his other associates in the library. Instead of looking out through the glass where Hannah played among the unimportant herbs and wildflowers, the men frowned and puffed on clay pipes, peering at what might have been onions wrapped in damp paper. That was those tulip bulbs. Remember that? It almost looked like an onion. The first picture that I showed you. If Papa and his friends love them so, Hannah asked her mother one day, why don't the tulips make them happy? Because they do not see them, Mother said. They've forgotten altogether what a tulip is. Poor Papa, she added softly. Will he remember? Hannah asked. A tulip's beauty is great, but greed is greater. Perhaps you can talk sense into him. Mother snapped a sprig from a low bush for Hannah. Rosemary, they say, is the food of memory. Late that night, Papa came to sit on the edge of Hannah's bed. He kissed the tip of her nose as he did every night, but then he sighed as if he'd forgotten how to speak. Hannah pressed the rosemary into his hand. His voice was teasing, a faraway whisper. And what, good doctor, do you prescribe to keep away dark thoughts? Hannah tried to concentrate on his question, but her eyelids drooped and closed like petals. That next evening, Hannah was sitting at her little garden table, meeting with her associates, when Nurse came to pick the burrs from her stockings. Hannah begged to say goodnight to Papa indoors, but the nurse said Dr. Depassier and Rembrandt had come to call and that Hannah must leave the men to their visit. Hana liked Rembrandt because of his hearty laugh and because he brought sweets from Amsterdam to hide around the house. Once, Hana found a candied raisin under a cushion weeks after his visit. I must see Rembrandt, she said. The nurse hushed her. Hana remembered something then and stopped pouting long enough to ask, "What cures dark thoughts?" Nurse pushed her lips and scooted past the darkening woodpile, her apron a white blur. Soon she was back. "Look here." Hana peered into the nurse's hands. Fireflies. Now, fireflies are not a bug that we have in our area. I kind of wish we did. They're also called lightning bugs, but they're little bugs that are out kind of on twilight, and they light up, and they're really cool looking. Wish we had them here. That'd be neat. Okay, who do you think that is way back there? If you're thinking Rembrandt, I think you might be right. Inside, Nurse tipped the fireflies into Hannah's lantern and placed a square lace over it. All evening, they blinked behind the glass, and when Papa came, Hannah said proudly, "Now you have rosemary for your memory and fireflies to chase the dark away." He called her his own sleepyhead. His voice was kind, but Papa forgot to kiss the tip of her nose. Which twitched with wanting. He motioned to a shadowy figure in the hall and seemed for an instant almost glad. A friend has come to say good night. Hannah was so pleased to see that her visitor that she didn't notice Papa go. Rembrandt! And how is my bright star of Harlem? Hannah flung her arms around Rembrandt's neck, and his soft mustache tickled her cheek. Have you kept to your lessons as you promised? Eyes, eyes. I'm tired of drawing eyes. Then try something else, he said. What is the use of drawing a thing when I would prefer to just look at it? You are by far my laziest pupil, Hannah. There is enough in careful study. Seeing is more than looking. He mussed her hair and peered at the painting over her bed. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's a painting of a tulip up there. I never much liked that one. You don't like Papa's tulip? They're the fashion, the bread and butter for some. I and I'd like any subject that gives us means, but I'll leave the florals for others. In other words, Rembrandt said, "Hey, I think anything's great as long as it pays the bills, but I don't like painting flowers." He never really liked painting flowers, and so he never really did. What is a means? Hannah wondered out loud. It's money, he said. Guilders and stivers. It's how we painters keep our children plump. It was Rembrandt and not Papa who kissed her on the nose that night, long after he'd gone. Hannah lay awake, troubled by the image of Papa's unsettling face. In the morning, Hannah raced to find Cook in the kitchen. What cures frowning? She added. Oh, a daisy does, Cook said firmly. Her arms jiggled as she rolled the dough. Daisy's nothing like that vixen tulip. She's nature's simple smile. Hannah spent all afternoon among the daisies. She plucked petals and sang, "Oh, one I love, two I love, three I love, I say, four I love with all my heart, five I cast away." She wove Papa a whole chain of daisies. What's this? Papa wondered at bedtime. Hannah held up the chain. This, she announced, is nature's simple smile. Papa laughed, but he did not look happy. He waved at the painting on Hannah's wall. Engraved on the frame were the words "Semper Augustus." Remember that was the flower that I told you about, the rarest of the rare, and worth. Oh wait, if only your daisies wore her smile, the rarest of the rare, and worth a small fortune, he said. Such splendor blooms only when it will, and tomorrow it will be too late. And this time Papa left without even a good night. Papa returned early from the inn the next day and shut himself into the library. Associates with stern faces arrived and went out again, with broadsheets scowling. Papa did not take refreshments, but sat all day long, pale still in the library. Mother and nurse and cook dared not disturb him. What's the matter? Hannah whispered. Mother knelt and took Hannah's two small hands in her own, speaking softly. I'm afraid it's urgent, Hannah. The tulips are worthless now, and there's no money. We've lost our means, and Papa fears for us. So Papa, let's kind of pause here for a second. You can see Papa right over here in the window, kind of by, you just, kind of looking down. Um, and this, it's happened. Okay, it's happened just like it happened with the Beanie Babies, but this time with the tulips. And people like Hannah's Papa lost all of his money, um, and and uh, and they now have, they're not really sure how they're going to survive. Hannah rushed into the bright, clean air to find Gardner. Perhaps there was still time. What do you do, she pleaded, to make a flower bloom, a special flower? Gardner balanced his rake. He smoothed his beard. I recommend worms, he said thoughtfully. They give the earth its spring, its life. Hannah and Franz went to work at once, but just as Hannah was about to scoop out a shiny pink worm with her spade, she saw it. Beyond the gate was a glorious, just bloomed tulip. It was white with streaky red feathered points, very like the tulip in the painting. She slipped into the north garden, her fingers itching to prick it, but that would be wrong. Even if Mother said the tulips were no longer valuable, this one was so beautiful it must be worth something. Hannah thought and thought. She watched intently the way the tulip caught the light and cupped it, swaying faintly in a breeze. She knew what to do. Indoors, she searched her bedchamber for the parcel of tiny clay pots Rembrandt had made for her on her earlier trip to Harlem. He had mixed the paints himself. Mother seemed relieved when Hannah called out to her in the all too quiet house. Together they found an old canvas and a rickety easel that had been left in the garden shed by one of Papa's artist friends. Mother brushed the spider webs off, and nurse and cook and gardener helped Hannah carry the easel and tools to the north garden, and even left Hannah and Franz alone there with the tulips. The tulip, the rarest of the rare. It was the Semper Augustus, right? Hannah was patient all evening. Night came, but Papa did not. At last, Hannah crept quietly downstairs to the library where Papa saw her. When Papa saw her, he looked away with shining eyes. Shining eyes kind of tells you he's maybe kind of crying, right? Perhaps another time, Hannah. Papa's not well today. But I have found our means for us. He leaned forward weakly in his armchair and motioned her to him. Hannah held out her painting, and Papa looked at it with unsteady hands. I will paint for our bread and butter, like Rembrandt and his pupils. I will paint the tulips, she said, because they're beautiful. Well, Hannah, what would I what that I were as wise and brave as you. He held the painting back and considered it. A fine likeness, the rarest of the rare. A light flickered in Papa's eyes, but he shook his head. It doesn't matter now. Well, then what will cheer you? Hannah put her hands on her hips. Will you never recover? I may have to go back to peddling my friends' paintings, including yours, he mused. And we will all have to go back to counting Stevers. But I'm not really ill, am I? You said so yourself, silly. Papa smiled for the first time in a long time. You've missed me, Hannah. Yes, and I've missed you. Papa took the little canvas from her hands and set it gently aside. He backed her up to look at her. My goodness, you've grown since I last really looked. Though Hannah was now determined to be a painter instead of a doctor, she reached out to feel his forehead and spoke in her most renowned physician's voice. You mustn't frown about it, she commanded. What's the cure, doctor? Hannah, pleased that Papa remembered their game, Hannah took his hand and led him through the glass doors into the garden. Rosemary perfumed the breeze, fireflies flickered, lighting the dreams of the night. Franz sprawled under the apple tree, and Hannah knew worms wiggled in the springy earth. When she and Papa came to the north garden, the tulips bowed their gorgeous heavy heads, shy for once in the dark. He, her, He breathed the night air and squeezed her hand, and Hannah knew, though Papa did not speak, that he would soon be well. And that is the end of our story. So the story there was that that Hannah's father kind of found what would made him happy in the first place, and it wasn't making all of the money that he was making with the tulips, and then he realized those kind of things could be lost, and they were, but the thing that he still had was his little daughter, and she was right there with him, and they got to kind of reunite, and they all realized what was really important. So that was Hannah and the Tulips. I hope you enjoyed it, and now we're going to do a little art project involving tulips.